Learn how to programmatically generate coordinate arrays and plot mathematical equation as smooth line graph using Plotly library. In this lesson, we want to look at how we can plot equations with Plotly.js. It's actually plotting, not lotting. Plotting equations with Plotly.js. So we are going to move directly into our boilerplate code and see how we can actually achieve that using web graphics in JavaScript. So if you look at my HTML part, I have the CDN that links to the Plotly library, as well as an empty div inside my HTML here that contains an ID of my plot style that contains the width and max width elements in order to define the space and the area that these equations will occupy in my web page. So let's move into the script part of our boilerplate code and let's start adding our code. So the first thing we want to do is we want to add a variable. Let's call it a short R for expression. And then call this math.sim. It's actually mathematics. So this is math.sim x. And now let's go ahead and generate values. How do you generate values? Well, a variable of x value will take an empty array. Let's set it to an empty array. We'll do another one for y. And this also will be an empty array. Now, let's now loop over what we have in our code. So I'll use the for in loop. Or rather, I'll use the for loop, not for in. So let's use for loop. So let's index. So we can call it index, or in my case, let me just use x to represent it. So for let x is equals to 0, x less equals to 10, x plus equals 0.1. Just hold on, I am going to explain this shortly. And so let's make our x values to add to the end of an array. You can see the push method append new elements to the end of an array and return the new length of the array. So let's use that value to be pushed into our array by using the x value to retrieve whatever is returned from x and push to the end of the array. And then our y values as well is going to make its own push and call an eval method, evaluate JavaScript code and execute it. So this evaluate method is going to evaluate the math.sim rather, that we have earlier. And now that you have this, you can come outside of that and then it's time to now display it. Display using Plotly, which is the library. So how do you do that? We'll set up our data variable. And inside it, let's have a couple of data. Let x represent x value. Our y will represent y value. Then we want to add mode. Since this is a plotting equation, our mode for plotting equation is always going to be lines, because you plot with lines, and even in mathematics. And once you add this, go ahead and add the layout, which is going to be a label for whatever it is that you want to plot. So let's call it okay, our y equals to expression. And once you do this, just call on the plotly function, new plot, then pass your the ID of the elements by plots. And this will first show, then pass in your data. And finally, pass in your layout. And then look at it. Y equals to math.sin x. You can see, you can download it, you can zoom in, you can interact with what you have, so many things that you can actually do with what you currently have on the screen right now. So looking closely at this example, the script plot a mathematically sine wave y equals to sine in a bracket of x, and it starts at x equals to 0, which is what we have in this loop, and calculates the height of the wave every 0.1 unit until it reaches 10. So it collects these calculated coordinates into two arrays, that is x and y. X, which is what is there, and y. And so it keeps pushing them into the array. And so once it's done in those two arrays, it uses plotly lines to draw a smooth, continuous wave across the grid. And this is generated automatically by the library. We are not the one constructing it manually. But the most important part of our code is where we are looping over the function until it reaches a certain threshold. So looking closely at what we have now, this particular first line is what holds the mathematical equation we want to graph as a text string. So this is what we are trying to graph. So, and it's a JavaScript built-in trigonometric sine function. So, like I said, we didn't just create this. It's a function that is built in JavaScript, and we're just calling it. And this part where we are actually looking, the loop starts at 0 and count up to 10, a tiny step of 0.1. So that's going to be a 0, 1, it will keep counting like that. If you look at it. Now, when it reaches 10, 0, 1.1, 0.2, 0.3, etc. So these small steps are what make the final curve look smooth instead of blocky. Now, look at it. See, 0.2, 0.4. So if you over it, minus, then it will go up again until it reaches the edge. You can see 0.3, and here we have 0.2, and at the peak, you can see 0.96 that is wrapped into, that can be rounded up into a significant number as we have it in our example. And then the eval method function, which is what we have here, it takes our text string, math.sin x, and run it as an active JavaScript code, thereby calculating the correct y height for the current value of x and saving it in our array. And our mode here, which is line, tells plotly to draw a continuous line connecting our calculated coordinates instead of rendering individual bar or scatter pure. So this is how you can plot equation in JavaScript using plotly.js library.